Welcome to a Champion Briefs topic analysis. I'm Michael Norton, the former champion of the Manchester Essex Invitational in Massachusetts, the Sunvitational in Florida, the Blake Invitational in Minnesota, the Harvard Invitational and Harvard Round Robin, while also being state champion, two-time national qualifier, two-time NCFL quarterfinalist, with a 90% win rate on the national circuit. I'm really happy to be working with Champion Briefs. I really trust the staff. They're some of my closest friends, and I know that a lot of the other briefs out there give you crap evidence. I've competed with crap evidence before, so I think you can take this as my effort to try and improve the state of the circuit post-departure. So I want to jump right into things and start talking about the topic. So, of course, definitionally, let's start out with the wording of the topic, which is the continuation of current U.S. anti-drug policies in Latin America will do more harm than good. So let's just talk about it on face. So, as many of you have pointed out, this is kind of ground-skewed. Like, pragmatically, efforts really just aren't going that great right now. And it's a philosophically confusing effort in the eyes of many, who just rather see legalization and just don't understand the massive costs that the United States is incurring to continue these programs of questionable effect. So, to that extent, I actually think it's a relatively interesting topic despite this. In that it forces teams to operate outside their comfort zone, because typically teams can succeed with thick cases full of huge pragmatic impacts. But I think this topic is very different, much like last year's TOC topic, in that debaters can't just win every round with monstrous impacts and solid warrant chains. The con just isn't designed that way. The topic is designed to have an interesting balance of framework on the con and weighing mechanisms and establishing ways to win with minimal offense through a specific lens, and to weigh that against large clashes of pragmatics through a relatively different framework, through basic cost-benefit analysis, which is kind of rudimentary, but let's be honest, what most teams will do on the affirmative. So I think it kind of forces teams to clash with framework, clash with weighing mechanisms and standards, not just on let's do cost-benefit analysis, okay, type of level, but on a more philosophical level. And I think that especially at the TOC, this is necessary to kind of weed out the wheat from the chaff in terms of separating people before the break. So let's talk about the ground, because I think the ground is pretty clear, but not absolute. So first off, don't be afraid to call somebody out on the topicality of a certain U.S. effort with benefits in Latin America. If someone's discussing an economic policy the United States has in Latin America, I don't know, maybe a certain monetary policy, force them to link it back to U.S. anti-drug policy. Don't let them just get away with any United States Latin America trade policy, anything like that. They have to demonstrate a direct link to U.S. policies specifically targeting the drug war in Latin America. But furthermore, when you're doing this evaluation of harms, make sure you take it the extra step, because it's good to demonstrate harms to Latin America, but a lot of judges just don't view rounds that way, and it makes it a lot easier to weigh when you make that extra step and link back to the United States. This isn't to say that every impact in every argument should be impacted in 5 different manners, which is a bad strategy, in that you're putting too much eggs in one basket. What I'm saying is, it's probably much easier to have a framework of U.S. harms, specifically it's easier to show why it's more harmful to the United States to engage in these policies, because it's almost unquestionably bad for Latin America. So I don't think that's a framework that's going to really win many rounds. So stick to United States. But finally, under the topic analysis, before we get into the arguments and the side bias, this isn't really a debate about what the ideal way to fight drug proliferation is. It's purely weighing the costs and benefits of programs already in place. Sure, you can find cards about how drug treatment programs are 23 times more effective, and how drug courts and legalization could probably solve all the costs. Sure, you can do that, and you'll have big numbers on your side, but that's not what's being debated. And no, I won't vote on it. Sorry, cut better evidence next time. That's why you're here at Champion Briefs. That's what we're here for. So let's evaluate what arguments actually are going to win you the round. So let's start with the pro. So as was pointed out, this is kind of the pragmatics heavy side of the debate. It's one with big numbers, scary impacts, and basic rudimentary cost-benefit analysis, appealing to the judges' intuitions as to what is good and what is bad for the United States. So you win debates on the pro by first setting up a number of arguments, core arguments, and winning those arguments, and then weighing those arguments comparatively and nullifying their framework, because any con team will have a framework that probably will try to I don't know, skew the debate in their favor, like arguing that efficacy must come first in terms of stopping the flow of drugs to the United States. You need to nullify that by either linking back into it, demonstrating you also solve, rendering it irrelevant in terms of the round, saying why it's not relevant in terms of United States harms, or presenting a counter-standard using warrants. Now, I want to make this very clear. In terms of framework, I'm not going to buy it as a judge, and I'm sure that the other judges at the Tournament of Champions, at your state tournament, district qualifiers, whatever, are not going to buy any sort of impact if you don't thoroughly warrant it. This also includes frameworks. If you're going to tell me to evaluate efficacy above all else, tell me why the United States considers efficacy in the drug war, in stopping the flow of drugs to the United States, more important than cost comparatively. Give me a warrant, not just a card that says they do. Not going to cut it. So let's go into the core arguments. So strategically, you should try to have a couple of core arguments, like the stalker arguments, to anchor your case. I know a lot of teams, myself included, would often try to have like sketchy arguments that would throw people off guard. Like, it's fine to have one or two of those, but if you have three contentions of that, you're really kind of hinging yourself on sketchy ground. So I think you should be careful. Like, sure, if you find a phenomenal argument that isn't necessarily based on like a sketchy link chain, go ahead. I'm just warning you that counterintuitive arguments are by definition risky because they are counterintuitive, and therefore judges are inherently less likely to buy them on face. So first, I want to talk about like Latin American relations. So Latin America is becoming like increasingly relevant as it becomes more developed, which means that probably more important to United States interests as a hegemon. So you argue that we're basically violating state sovereignty, which is frustrating their leaders, making them unwilling to align with us, which decreases our soft power when trying to act diplomatically with these nations and trying to get other policy changes enacted. So we think we decrease our sway with other nations when we like violate their state sovereignty, like act in ways that they don't approve of in like surrounding nations or even within their nation. So we piss off like other governmental leaders throughout Latin America, which undermines the United States' abilities to actually influence policy around the world. So that's an argument. Secondarily, there's the basic cost argument. Doesn't win a lot of debates like in like the very blowout rounds, but in a very close debate, never underestimate a basic economics argument. You never know like when an economics argument will come in handy. It's always good to have one on hand. It's like a Swiss Army knife. Like you'll use one every topic. You never know when it'll work. Most teams will run one. Just try and find a sneaky way to run it. So obviously, like, billions of dollars are kind of being wasted on this program, which means kind of trading off with other government programs and like kind of funding the United States deficit, which is like kind of bad. So I think that's argument's pretty clear. I don't really need to go into depth. If you have any questions about it, just look at the Champion Brief's evidence. I think it'll be pretty clear as to why this is an economically detrimental argument. Third is efficacy, and this is just like a terminal D-link of their case. If you can demonstrate that they don't actually solve the war on drugs, that they don't actually gain any of their impacts, then game over. So the first way to do this is you argue they're mishandling the situation, that they're basically botching their efforts by like violating state sovereignty so that they're not on their side, which means that they're not going to support policies to actually solve. But secondly, you could argue you're not presenting a meaningful alternative to the people that actually grow drugs. Like, let me give you an example. Let's say you're a drug farmer, and then someone just, like, I don't know, takes your weed. Let's say you grow marijuana. If they take it, but don't give you an alternative, won't you just grow marijuana again? Like, if people don't have an alternative way to live their life, and this is how they were trained to sustain themselves, then they're going to continue growing marijuana, continue making heroin. Like, they have to show that they're actually gaining a way to change the culture of drug growing and like the cartel culture in these societies, which probably the United States policies are not doing. But furthermore, fighting empirically has increased the like entrenchment of these forces because it kind of drives the trade underground, which makes it almost invisible to local forces. And the local machines are usually the ones that are more effective because they understand like the populace. So we make it harder for other countries to deal with their own programs by driving them underground when the United States gets involved. The final core argument is about geopolitical instability, because clearly Latin America isn't the most stable region. I'm sure we've all seen pictures on the internet of like severed heads in Mexico and, I don't know, crashed planes that were shot down due to their drug content. So clearly this isn't the most stable region in the world. So conflict probably isn't making it any better. Like when the United States shows up guns blazing, it's probably not going to like decrease the amount of tension and decrease the amount of conflict, which is leading to civilian casualties, leading to a destabilization of the region, which is decreasing governmental legitimacy and creating areas where terrorism and other organizations can flourish. So argue that geopolitical instability is going to be created as a result of making an already unstable region much more unstable. So here are some fringe arguments. Like I told you, like don't use too many of these, but these are just a couple ideas. So first, like environmental impacts, you could argue there are a few programs that the United States uses pesticides to actually like cut off the drugs at the source by like shooting them over drug fields. So you could argue that this kills the surrounding area vegetation, which decreases biodiversity, puts ecosystems at risk, and also has harms to humans because DDT isn't entirely victimless. But secondarily, you could argue about weapons proliferation because the United States doesn't just act directly. They also act through other actors, like for example by distributing small arms to facilitate other actors' ability to stop the drug war. So the problem with that is by distributing small arms often become loose arms, which means that people can kind of just take them. And the problem is the people that take them are often gangs and often cartels. And when gang members and cartels have guns, they shoot us. So not universally good. And as a result, kind of hurting the war on drugs, kind of hurting stability. It's bad. So let's move on to the con. So a lot of people think this is the much more difficult side. I just think you have to be a little more tricky. So it's framework heavy, which means that it's based in principle and philosophy. So you win debates on the con by 1, establishing a framework of what's prioritized in terms of weighing costs versus benefits. 2, linking your arguments into that framework and demonstrating why you satisfy the burdens of said framework. And 3, doing comparative analysis and why your side is better fitting that framework. Like for example, if your framework is we ought solve the issue of drug proliferation above all else, demonstrate why their arguments aren't actually comparatively better for solving this drug war problem and solving the spread of drugs across the United States. So let's look at the core arguments. The core framework, I think, is definitely going to be efficacy, and like efficacy comes before all else, because realistically you're never going to win under a cost framework, because unless you want to argue some sort of like spillover cost, which I'm sure you could, but like it's not really the ultimate strategy. I think that this is the best way because you argue that drug use has spillover effects, which like allows you to link into other pragmatic arguments like a bad society, that you're only going to undermine other facets of society, which leads to domestic economic harms, treatment problems, addiction, like gang violence. Like if you can show spillover effects that are even worse than the actual policy targets, then I'm sure that you can demonstrate that the world without these policies and no other like substitute policies is definitely worse off. But you could also justify it philosophically, because I don't think you have to win the pragmatics argument. If you set up a framework that says that drug use is just part of a bad society and that we ought to avoid it at all cost, and you warrant that philosophically as to why we should always avoid drug use, then I think that kind of preempts all other arguments. Like, if you can demonstrate that a good society avoids drug use, then even if the judge buys monetary costs, even if they buy instability, then they're instantly defaulting to your argument because it becomes a priority, because you show that this is the most important issue. Even if you don't show that there's like spillover effects that will outweigh anything, you can still win the debate on philosophical grounds. So that's another way to target it. I don't necessarily think that's the ultimate strategy, but I think that you should definitely use some sort of framework which prioritizes efficacy and says that as long as we can show you that we're decreasing the drug flow to the United States, that's enough of a harm to outweigh anything that they show on your side of the house, or benefit, I guess. So a few other arguments to just kind of clash with affirmative benefits. First, efficacy, something you should probably win. So a number of ways to link into this. So first, you argue by cutting it off at the source, you're better able to handle it rather than tangentially like waiting till it comes down the line and trickles into the United States and handling once it's already been dispersed into all the actors, and that it's comparatively better and you can prevent the spread of drugs into the hands of the people that use them. But secondarily, you can argue a deterrence argument that when the United States sets a precedent of like not taking crap from other people, not standing up for people using these drugs, that we're going to see like people not willing to really engage in the drug market. But thirdly, you can argue that the United States is working to change the drug culture, and that the United States is actually working, and this is contrary to what I said when I did the affirmative analysis. Obviously, there's going to be clashing analysis, is that you're changing the culture of like these drug growing areas and like providing people ways out so that they don't have to grow, so that they don't have to be distributors, so that they don't have to be henchmen their entire lives, which kind of allows people to change. But finally, you argue that you can decrease regional volatility, which can allow people to combat these problems much more effectively. So those are the arguments. There aren't as many fringe arguments on the negative side. I'd be interested to see them. So at the end of the day, just make sure that you have a framework on the negative, make sure you link back into it, and make sure that you like focus on the relative arguments at the end of the day, and don't let pro teams just get away with a cost-benefit analysis framework. So that's really all I have to say. I'm sure that the champion briefs will provide a much more in-depth analysis about each individual argument and provide a lot of evidence. I really wish you luck at the Tournament of Champions, at your state tournament, at your district qualifier, at your last tournaments, because the April topic is always a gem. I know it seems difficult at first, but trust me, you'll learn to love this topic. I know I already have. So thanks, that's all I have to say. Bye.